What does Mahatma Gandhi of podcasting mean to you? What does pacifism mean in the face of podcasting?
You look good, Yellow. Have that sickly hue about you.
Bro, what the hell is happening? Dude, I'm re-listening to God help me. I'm re-listening to the Doom Debates episodes because I'm looking for clips and stuff. And I put listening to those ones off for quite a while, but I realized there's probably some good content in there, is what I told myself. I am a bit surprised of the general reaction to you in that
I was going to say, because how much of an asshole I was? Or
yeah, you don't actually come across as an asshole, I would say.
Really? Because I've been talking to my therapist about this for the last year and a half, so that's good to know. Yeah, that's
thousands of dollars spent remedying a non-problem.
Well, I think I definitely came in there already kind of mad. I was just mad at the project, mad at the cult leader dimension of it, and the doom and gloom side of things. And so I think the emotion just is multiplied by 50 when you're on these video platforms where people can see your expressions and stuff. And so I think it just comes across as much harsher, but
possibly I would have expected it to be the other way around, right? So I think I have a better sense of when you're getting angry than another person who hasn't interacted with you. And so to me, I can tell that, yeah, you're a little short at times, and I can kind of tell that you're trying to ask questions in a certain way to drive home that something's a little bit ludicrous, but without actually saying that explicitly. There are some of those dynamics going on, but I would be surprised if people could tell what was without knowing you. So so maybe it gets worse later. I honestly can't remember, and maybe that's where it's coming from. But I'm just generally surprised at the outcry of that episode.
It's interesting. Even if all the commenters are wrong, I should act as if they're right and learn from the criticisms, because clearly there is some signal there that I was missing, and hopefully I was better in the second one. I was certainly more chastised by the comment feed there, but yeah, no, it was a good learning experience. How did you feel you came off? Because when I was listening to it, I thought that you were just crushing it, but these are the ones that you felt most cringe about, that you really didn't want to listen to, and maybe reflect on that a little bit. What about the episodes did you just hate so much?
This is becoming a nice little increments therapy session here. Please reflect on your performance on Doom Debates. Tell me about it. Tell me about your worst fears. I haven't still been able to listen to the second one, because I remember me getting kind of frustrated in that conversation that we just were clearly never going to descend into any sort of object level discussion of what LLMs were, what they were doing. The word gradient descent was not about to be uttered. And so when I realized that, I kind of thought, what the fuck's the point here? He's just going to talk about trends, and then we're going to repeatedly say that that's not a great way to gauge the capabilities of these models, and then we're just going to get stuck in a very predictable way. And that's exactly kind of what happened. Yeah. And so I don't really want to hear myself get frustrated in that second combo. The first one, I think I was fine. I don't think I had an award-winning performance, but I very rarely have award-winning performances. So, but yeah, it was fine.
Well, so I got some intro segment for you.
Nice.
So I heard from a friend who's a teacher at a high school how she's addressing the ChatGPT issue for essay writing and stuff. And to me, she gave the most reasonable and just solution to that problem that I've heard so far, and I feel it's totally robust. And so I'd love to bat it around with you to see if you agree or disagree that it's just a great solution. And so the solution is super simple. It's basically that if you're a teacher and you suspect that your student has used ChatGPT to write their essay, then you just say, okay, we're going to have a quick session in front of the class, and I'm just going to ask you to explain a few of the parts of the things that you wrote. So please explain what this word means. Please explain what you meant here. And I think that'll quickly humble them, and then spread fear to the rest of the class about using it to cheat. But importantly, I think it's teaching the skill of it's fine to use ChatGPT, but you just have to use it in such a way that your understanding has improved. And so if you get ChatGPT to write the first version of your essay, and then you rewrite it and you can defend and understand everything in it, then that like totally mirrors how you would use it at like a job. If you're doing knowledge work or you have to send a proposal or something, there's no problem with using it. It's just the problem of using it in a sloppy fashion. So just this simple idea of like, whatever you submit, you should be able to talk about live in person, unassisted. And so that's what she's been doing with her class. And I just think it's like a super simple and elegant solution, which is just the teacher says, go nuts. Do use it as much as you like. I'm going to be using it. We all are going to use it. You're going to have to learn how to incorporate this technology into like your own self-education. But anything you submit, you have to be able to defend and explain and talk about independent of ChatGPT. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's maybe worth drawing a distinction between two different concerns about the use of ChatGPT. And I think this deals with one of them. And that concern is whether students are truly understanding things at the end of the day. Yep. And so if that's your main concern, then yeah, you'll just let students use ChatGPT as much as they want as another learning tool. And you don't have to have many original thoughts, but as long as they're telling you things and then you really absorb what they're telling you, and you can think about what they're telling you and reflect on it and critically engage with it, then that's fine. And then you're going to be able to pass with flying colors when you stand up in front of the class and do it. And that's really just about like the understanding and information absorption side of this picture. But another concern that I've heard people voice is whether this is just going to replace thinking and generating your own ideas in the first place. So like, is there value being like assigned a reading and then just asked to come up with your own thoughts about it, right? So if they assign you an essay from Popper and you go home and you read the essay and then you sit with it for a few hours and you highlight certain things and you get confused and you really have to reflect on like, okay, does this pass the sniff test? Do I agree with this? Do I not agree with this? Why? I think, and so there's people that would say that's where we're worried about ChatGPT entering the picture, because there's something sort of sacred and important about people learning how to think on their own without external tool use. And then they can bring external tool use into the picture later. But if I just immediately go to ChatGPT and I say, tell me about this essay from Popper, what do you think he was trying to say? And then that tells me a bunch of stuff. And then I memorize what that says, and even like critically engage with what ChatGPT says at that stage. Those are different things.
Yeah, I agree that they're different, but this reminds me of something that Joseph Agassi said with regards to like teaching kids like how to write essays and how to think. And what he said is that like the whole notion of like this 5-paragraph essay, right? So you have your intro, you have your 3 arguments, boom, 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 and then you have your conclusion. Is just totally the wrong device for teaching kids how to learn. And I think part of that is that like, and this echoes something Popper says, which is like, I don't think you should try to be original. I think that originality comes kind of in the cracks of like what questions you would ask into ChatGPT, even the choice of choosing Popper in the first place, how you decide to reword certain things. Sorry, let me take one step back. So what does Agassi propose instead? Well, he proposes that it would be much better to tell kids, okay, I want you to be able to accurately summarize both sides of an ongoing cultural debate. So don't try to be original. Just try to understand what people are already talking about, right? And can you accurately reflect what the pro-lifers think about the abortion debate and the pro-choicers? Because when you're talking to like 16-year-olds and you're asking them to write an essay on the Industrial Revolution, I don't want them to have original thoughts. I want them to research, and I want them to build on the edifice of stuff that's come before. And the originality will kind of come in just the kinds of questions that they choose to ask into onto the internet. But so I guess I would return to you that maybe the best way to teach people to have original thoughts isn't to tell them, okay, I want you to be original now. It's to tell them, okay, just like first understand what the state of the art is. Like, what's the state of the discourse? Can you like do you have a good like background foundation on what the major arguments are? Because the chances of them saying something original on the subject of the Industrial Revolution is essentially nil. And so rather than stressing originality, just stress like mastery of the subject at the beginning. And then originality, I think, will come from that. And maybe the last thing I'll say is this echoes something that I've heard And maybe I've talked about this on the pod. But when I was like 19, I switched from an acoustic guitar teacher to an electric jazz instructor, Ralph Bushmeyer. And he basically said, like, okay, if you want to be an excellent guitar player, an excellent soloer, don't try to be original. First, try to master the style of Jimi Hendrix. Then try to master the style of Stevie Ray Vaughan. Then try to master the style of Jimmy Page. And then by like the 6th or 7th time you've done that, all of a sudden you don't notice that you are combining elements from these greats in a very unique way, but just focus on mastery of the craft, and then originality will kind of come when you're not paying attention to it. But if you focus on like, okay, I want to come up with my original guitar style, like before you've just learned the fundamental rudiments of how to play and copy and mimic, I think it's not very helpful to tell kids to be original. I think telling them to master the craft is a much more fruitful way to encourage originality. And so I guess I would return to you, which is like, if the long-term goal is for them to think original thoughts, then let's just start with mastering certain well-understood skills, and the originality will come later.
This seems to be answering an orthogonal objection to whatever I was objecting to. So let's just forget originality. So you assign an essay to be understood. So we're in Agassi's class and he says, here is an essay by a pro-lifer. I want you to just digest this. Go home and think about it. And then write, what they think. Like, just repeat their argument in like a way that makes most sense to you. So one student like goes home, reads the essay, writes down what they think the essay is about. The other student just feeds the essay into ChatGPT, reads what ChatGPT says about the essay, understands that, and therefore can pass the stand up in front of your class and repeat what my essay said test. And I think one of those experiences is probably better than the other for the student's understanding. Forgetting there doesn't have to be originality here, etc. I'm not asking them to produce their own original essay about this topic. I'm just saying when it comes to actually absorbing information and ideas, then I don't think you want to be always reliant on whatever ChatGPT says about something. And this is different if you're doing if you're doing research for your own purposes and it's self-guided question, what your confusions are, that's sort of different. But if you have to put yourself at these are teachers in schools. Kids don't want to be doing these assignments most of the time. So they're looking for the quickest way out of this. This is not of intrinsic interest to them. They're assigned this reading and they're asked to understand it and then summarize it. And I guess maybe my core concern is it hard to pass the stand up in front of your class test? Is that actually a hard thing to do? If you had just read what ChatGPT has said about this topic?
Well, I think it would depend on the kinds of questions that the teacher would ask of the student in that case. So I find that the most important thing is, quote, the Feynman technique, unquote, which is rewriting something into your own words. You don't have to be original, but you do have to come up with just an original sentence structure. Just read ChatGPT summary, that's fine. But then just rewrite that summary into your own words. I guess I don't really see the difference between rewriting a summary of an essay compared to rewriting an essay which is itself summarizing a literature, right? Everything is a summary of a previous thing. And what's the difference between shopping around to try to find an essay written in a style that lands with you, like a writing style that lands with you, compared to taking that essay, getting ChatGPT to rewrite it into a style that lands with you, and then continuing to do the Feynman technique of rewriting it into your own words.
But they're skipping that last step. That was the point, right? Students are just showing up, they're handing in the ChatGPT essay instead of their own essay. And then the teacher's suspicious of this and says, could you tell me what this essay is about? And I'm just questioning whether it's actually hard for students to pass that test.
Well, so if you hand in a ChatGPT essay, it's going to the friend who I was speaking to, Courtney, she was saying she's read some of these essays and this kid has used a word in this essay that he or she would never use in the real world, in real life. Clearly it's been just copy and pasted from ChatGPT, right? And so that kind of thing can be detected fairly easily. And the copying and pasting is a problem for sure, but I don't think that's any more of a problem than Wikipedia. The analogy I've been using a lot recently is we're currently in the same stage with ChatGPT that like millennials, so people who are in their 30s, they'll remember going to school when Wikipedia was invented, right? And there was this big brouhaha about Wikipedia. Can't use Wikipedia; it's cheating. You can't just go into the resources, like look at the citations and copy that. Like, don't use Wikipedia. That's complete.
It might be
cheating.
faked.
And so there's like a couple years of like a learning curve, right, where everyone was like, okay, so yeah, sure, you can just copy and paste from Wikipedia, but it's actually much better to use the citations from Wikipedia and then go read the original sources and stuff. And so I definitely see a problem with just copying and pasting without thinking about it. But I don't think that problem is intrinsic to ChatGPT. Like, if your teacher can tell that you haven't written this yourself or understood what's been submitted, then a boss or a client will also be able to tell.
I'm realizing then we just got off on the wrong foot, because I'm confused about what problem is she trying to solve? I thought she was trying to solve people plagiarizing using ChatGPT.
Using ChatGPT without like rewriting or understanding, right? So, okay, if ChatGPT writes you like one sentence, sure, you can put it in there. But if it writes you a whole essay, maybe you'll change like a few of the sentences. And as you're going through it and trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to change so that I can pass the teacher test? That's the very act of trying to understand what it's been written, right? It's less about like just copying and pasting and more about the person you sent it to. Like, can they tell you've just like shipped this in without really thinking about it? Because that's the major life skill that we're all going to need to now have, right? Like, if you just submit to your boss something that you just clearly just wrote into ChatGPT and not thought about it, your boss is going to be like, what the fuck, man? But if you use ChatGPT like any of us do, which is maybe it writes the first draft, maybe you change this, that doesn't sound like my voice, like the little tweaks and changes is, I think, totally fine, because that's how we're all using it in general. Am I being incoherent or contradictory?
well, you're talking about the students' incentive now to change the essay, and whether that's a valid solution, whether they'll still learn things. And that's fine. But she's trying to she's worried about plagiarization, right?
The main worry is that, like, okay, now that ChatGPT is around, all students are just not going to get anything from the assignments, right? So it's not necessarily plagiarizing or like getting them to not use it. It's just getting them to use it in such a way that they will need to use it when they leave school, and in a way that it's enriching themselves, because they'll be able to defend everything that they've written and submitted. Either if it's just copy and paste from ChatGPT, or it's copy and paste plus some tweaks, plus some rewording, plus some shifting around. Like, that's all, like, that's how we use it, right? And I think that's a valuable skill. So it's not like, how do we figure out a way to get kids to not use ChatGPT anymore? It's more, how do we get kids to use ChatGPT in a way that will be reflective of how they're going to use it for the rest of their life, in a beneficial way to themselves.
Nice. Yeah, I agree with that philosophy of trying to get them to incorporate it in a way where they keep learning. I guess I'm still a bit confused about the problem in the setup.
The problem is that they're using it unproductively. They're using it in the same way that people were just copying and pasting from Wikipedia.
So meaning plagiarizing from it.
Plagiarizing does make sense on the Wikipedia context, right? But I don't think it makes sense on the ChatGPT context, because whatever you copy in, it comes from the prompt that you use. So I don't know if it counts as plagiarism, but that's a terminology thing.
Okay, but is the concern that they're just prompting it for an essay, say, in this case, and then handing in that essay? Is that, yes, or is that not the concern?
Yes, yeah, that's a concern. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I guess, and then my one question is just whether the stand up in front of the class test is sufficient to get them to actually change the essay significantly enough such that they're actually learning from it. Because I think the standing up in the class test is also measuring lots of things that aren't just how well do you know what you've handed in. It's how good are you off the top of your head? How eloquent are you? How verbally fluent are you? How confident are you? Do you like everyone else in your class? Are you a nervous wreck? Things like that. And so you can imagine someone who's just written their own essay actually struggling in front of the class because they're nervous and they're an introvert and they were bullied the day before, etc. And then, some bullshitter like us is up there and is just having a great time talking about whatever shit's on the top of their head.
So the nervous student who's written their own essay wouldn't be then subjected to this test. But the lazy student who just used ChatGPT to ship it in, that would be the student that not only is going to be up in front of the class, but it has to be made an example of. It has to be humiliated by the teacher in order to spread fear to the rest of the class that, like, if you do this, like, you're not going to look very good. And presumably, if we're talking about like high school students and stuff, a teacher who knows that this has been shipped in, like, will be able to ask enough embarrassing questions to dethrone their confidence, so to speak. But there's very much a like you do it once and you just tarnish the kid. You just ravish him with questions to make him be like, because presumably the kid's also going to be lying, right? The kid's also going to be like, no, I didn't use ChatGPT for this, or I didn't use it in a lazy fashion. I can defend everything that I submitted. But if they can't do it, then that'll be publicly embarrassing. And so that was the proposed solution, which I thought totally would work.
Yeah, interesting. Have a report back on the success. I'd be interested to see. One question is like, is her school going to let her do that? Because I was kind of under the assumption that it was schools themselves that were sort of dictating whether ChatGPT, et cetera, could be used in classrooms and not individual teachers.
I think schools are trying to make these policies. It's just that they don't work, right? The kids are going to do it anyways. It's not really about what they're allowed to do or not allowed to do. It's just that they're going to cheat, right? And so it's about being like, okay, I know I can't prevent you from using this, but if you do use it, and I don't think that you can defend what you've written, then we're going to have a public struggle session. We're going Stalinist on your ass, Johnny. And so. Yeah, I just thought that was a very like something that could be implemented by a teacher independent of the school policy. Shall we get into the meat of it? I'm excited now. We haven't done a Conjectures and Refutations episode in ages. Let's grab my drink and fill up, and let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Increments. I'm one half of your hosts, Vaden Masrani, Senior Research Scientist in Machine Learning, and the man himself, recently back from India, the Mahatma Gandhi of podcasting, Benjamin Bhopal Wonder Gherkin Chug.
Bhopal.
I don't even know what that means. I just thought it captured the essence, just international traveler and your wonderful gherkin,
What does Mahatma Gandhi of podcasting mean to you? What does pacifism mean in the face of podcasting? I just lay down under all your ruthless blows? Does this explain our dynamic over all these years? Is this what I can appeal to now?
I have no idea what the Mahatma Gandhi of podcasting means. I just thought it was funny as fuck. The Mahatma Gandhi.
Well, I do walk into these battles willingly and with a smile on my face, as he I think advocated that the Jews do into gas chambers. So
yeah, exactly.
I think the analogy is basically accurate, to be honest. That's how I've always pictured myself, walking willingly to my death to come here and face you, arguing about Popper.
Oh, that's so funny.
Oh, that's a bad one.
Where are we? We are on YouTube. We're on Spotify. We're on Twitter. We're on Twitter, right? And we're hopefully soon, maybe, potentially, going to be on TikTok and Instagram, getting some shorts going. Any other intro blurb stuff we should be dropping at this stage?
No, I think that's it. Apologies for the hiatus, but now we're back on it. We're going to be blasting them out faster than you can even listen to them.
Boom.
So,
fuck yeah. I'm swearing a lot in this episode already. I think it's just because I'm super excited for it.
Do you remember at the beginning, our parents got really mad at us for releasing podcasts in which we swore? Back in the good old days when our parents were the only ones who listened to the episodes. The only feedback we got was crickets from the rest of the world and our parents getting mad at us for swearing. So much so that I think we retroactively went back and edited out some of our swearing.
I definitely got some swears, for sure. Yeah, my mom also pointed out something that's lived with me forever, which is that I was saying verse instead of verses. So like Kenny versus Spenny compared to Kenny versus Spenny. But because you're so used to seeing VS and then abbreviating it as verse. Yeah. But verse is like a lyrical verse. It doesn't actually mean verse. But now I listen for it for other people, and some other people make that move too. So yeah, today we're doing chapter 6 from Conjectures and Refutations. A note on Berkeley as precursor of Mach and Einstein. So I'll pass it over to you to set it up, but maybe just for the audience, I found this to be a more difficult chapter. I think we're starting to get to the more difficult ones, but yeah, we've delayed them as long as possible.
Now we're dragging you all down with us, though. Get ready.
Yeah, we peaked early and we're slowly just plummeting. But after spending some time with it and zooming out and kind of reading a bit more of the context around the essay, I thought there's some really cool stuff in here. The only other one thing I'll say is it's definitely related to episode 33 that we did on instrumentalism and essentialism. I don't think we're going to assume that the audience knows what those words mean, but there'll definitely be a through line between this episode and episode 33. So definitely listen to that if you want more info, but we won't require it as pre-listening. But yeah, man, how do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, maybe a place to start is just with Newton. So we've talked a lot before about the period sort of after Newton had written the Principia, and especially how Kant reacted to it. And in particular, Kant was very taken with it. And when Kant was writing, I think most philosophers, most physicists were convinced of the correctness of Newton. Mm-hmm. And so then that led us down into questions of epistemology on that side. So you had a bunch of people thinking Newton's theories were absolutely correct. And then you can start asking the question, what sort of epistemology came out of that? Like, how did people justify that? How did they think they had come by that knowledge? Newton was puzzled by the kinds of paradoxes because he didn't believe that we actually got this knowledge via pure empiricism or inductive logic or something like that. But he also thought we had stumbled on something that was certainly correct. But this chapter is sort of going the other direction. So now we're going to talk about some criticisms of Newtonian mechanics and talk about a counterwave that was displeased with some of the methods he used to come up with his theories and some of the consequences of his theories. Some of the interpretations of his theories, once he writes down the mathematics that seems to describe things so well, how do we actually relate that to the world? Like, do we now posit that these things called forces exist? What do we make of this thing called gravity? What the hell is this? Are we allowed to have these sorts of new funky things in our science? And, there's a whole bunch of people who said no. Like, a lot of these notions are useful fictions, but they're not true in any sense. They don't deserve a place in science. So there was this big cultural pushback. And a lot of that pushback, as we're going to see today, sort of started with this guy named George Berkeley, who later became a bishop and is now known as Bishop Berkeley. And his criticisms, at least as read by Popper, really set the foundation for a lot of future criticisms as well. Criticisms that went right up into 20th century physics. And so they sort of really span the entire era of Newtonian mechanics.
Yeah, hell yeah, totally. So the people that we'll be largely talking about today are, George Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley, which is the namesake of Berkeley University and Berkeley in the States, which I actually didn't know. But that's where that got its name. And so he came, he was around, when was he around?
So Locke was 1600s. So Berkeley was either 1600s or 1700s.
Yeah, so I just pulled it up. So born 1685. Yeah, so Locke was one of the first empiricists. All knowledge comes through the senses. Locke strongly influenced Berkeley, who then strongly influenced Hume, who then strongly influenced Kant, who then strongly influenced Popper. And so that's kind of the lineage. So we'll talk about Berkeley. The other place he might be known is, for the Deutschians in the audience, Berkeley is the person whom Samuel Johnson was discussing when Samuel Johnson kicked the rock and said, and yet it moves. So the way that kind of relates to Deutschian stuff is this idea of a reality kicking back. And one of Berkeley's ideas, which I don't know if we'll talk about too much, is idealism, that everything is just a figment of your imagination, of your ideas. It's one of the first, I don't know if you call him a solipsist, but he made a bunch of arguments basically saying that everything is in the mind, which I now realize slightly contradicts the fact that he's an empiricist and not a rationalist.
Dude, yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up the exact same thing. There's some crazy... Speaking of ChatGPT, I was ChatGPTing the shit out of this because I was like, how is this possible that you're both an idealist and an empiricist? So for the listeners, idealism is the idea that we create the world with our minds. So the most intense form of idealism which goes beyond even what a lot of like the hardcore German idealists thought, which we have talked about before. So I won't go in there. But is that like, yeah, so the only things that exist in the world basically is God. In Berkeley was very religious, and that's going to influence his ideas. And then our minds. And our minds give rise to the world. Okay, so that's idealism. Ideas are primary, is I guess the way to remember it. And then empiricism, as you say, is that we learn about the world via experience. But then this seems extremely bizarre, because what does this mean at the end of the day? It means like, well, your mind is creating reality, but then you're just learning about reality by witnessing it. So it's pretty circular. Like you're creating the world, but then you're just learning about what you created by witnessing it. It's like, well, why not? Like, but you already know it because it originated in your mind. And there's all sorts of bizarre paradoxes here. Like empiricists are usually at least committed to the idea that there's like this sort of single objective world out there. But this is kind of a problem for idealists because we all have different minds. And so you could either go solipsism mode, but Berkeley wasn't a solipsist. So he thought there was a bunch of different minds at least. And then our minds are all creating the world. But then you have to ask the question, well, how do we all inhabit the same world because we all have different ideas and stuff? And he appealed to God for this. So he said, we share a reality because God basically ensures that our minds have similar thought patterns or learn things in similar ways. So like you and I can interact with the same flower because our minds are giving rise to something similar because of God, basically. But then it's like, well, are things just similar or are they identical? Like, is it actually the same flower or is it just like different thoughts in the same flower? And then like, what happens to like free will or anything, which all these people wanted to invoke at that point? So like, so I'm just genuinely puzzled by how you could think this, which gave rise to the slightly separate thought that, tell me what you think about this, but it seems pretty clear that like philosophy has advanced in its methods of argumentation. Like, I just think like there was a lot of original ideas that came out of modern philosophy and Renaissance philosophy and Socratic philosophy, etc. But most of those were like interesting questions to ask. It seems like most of their actual tools for scrutinizing those questions and arguments they came up with are like pretty bad and would not pass muster in any philosophy seminar in any university today. Like, it just seems like you're like, well, there's two types of things in the world. Fuck it, and like, why not? And like, yeah, I don't know. Do you agree that things like we've gotten tighter in our ability to argue about things?
For sure, yeah. Just because there's many more arguments, right? And so we know what bad arguments kind of look like in many different forms. There's just more people writing, debating, discussing. And if you're talking to someone who's good faith, and if you point out that I'm being circular, then I'll be like, oh, okay, stop. So I won't even like pursue that line any further. But when a lot of these arguments were made in the first place, there's just no counter arguments to it. So 100% there's been advancement. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. So I guess what's kind of interesting about this essay is that, a lot of Berkeley's ideas are just whack. Let's just say that they're totally whack. And Popper has criticized them extensively in Realism and the Aim of Science, as well as in chapter 3, I believe he critiques Berkeley. But this essay, he's defending him, which is very Popperian. Just because someone has some bad ideas doesn't mean that there's not some good gems in there as well. To connect the dots, and then I want to definitely dive into the Newton stuff. Essentially, Ernst Mach, based on a bad philosophy, which we'll talk about, had some very good criticisms of Newton, which, again, we'll also talk about. And what Popper's saying here is that a lot of Mach's good criticisms of Newton, which then were fixed by Einstein, were preceded by some stuff that Berkeley wrote 200 years earlier. And so a note on Berkeley as the precursor of Mach and Einstein. The point of the essay is saying that a lot of Mach's good arguments against Newton, which laid the groundwork for Einstein, were developed first by Berkeley in the 1700s. And that's the connection, and that's the main thesis that Popper's putting forward. And then actually, when you read Mach's Wikipedia page, there's a link to this essay. So the connection between Mach and Berkeley has been established now because of the essay that we're going to be reading.
Do you think Popper was like throwing some shade at Mach? I kind of read that tone a little bit of like, yo, everyone thinks he's being super original, but these ideas existed like 100 years at least before he invented any of these, so-called unique criticisms. And like, I couldn't help but reading that into the essay a little bit.
Yeah, no, I 100% saw that too. Yeah. There's one line. Let's see if I can find that line.
Near the end, I think. So this is after he lists the 21 theses, which we'll go into. He says, everyone who reads this list of 21 theses must be struck by their modernity. They are surprisingly similar, especially in the criticism of Newton, to the philosophy of physics which Ernst Mach taught for many years in the conviction that it was new and revolutionary, in which he was followed by, for example, and some names. And like that line, I was like, oof, that's that's a spicy take.
100%. Okay, so I would love to defend Mach, though, and talk about, like, quote, the problem situation, what he was responding to in Newton. Yeah, so in preparation for this episode, I read another book which gave a number of like really good examples, and I feel like I have a better understanding of the essentialism versus instrumentalism debate. And that book is Boltzmann's Atom by David Lindley. And so this book describes the battle between Ludwig Boltzmann, who invented statistical mechanics, and is the person who came up with the definition of entropy. So a very important figure of his time. And Mach. Mach basically didn't believe any of it. So the book opens by Mach saying in like 1897 that he doesn't believe in atoms. I don't believe in atoms. Atoms are bullshit. And statistical mechanics and Boltzmann's work is premised upon this idea of atoms, little things moving around. So what was Mach responding to? Well, let's forget what we all know about why things are hot. So why are things hot? Things are hot because particles are moving around and it's the kinetic energy. And so the hotter something is, the more the particles are moving, and that's what heat is. But before we had the atomic theory of heat, there was another theory of heat called the caloric theory of heat. And so what this theory says is that things are hot because inside every object is this entity called caloric. And so very hot things have a lot of caloric. And when a hot thing touches a cold thing, what's happening is the caloric is dribbling out of the hot thing and it's moving to the cold thing. So it's the movement of this caloric stuff from one object to another object. That's one example. Another example. So why do things combust? Well, so now we know that combustion is a chemical reaction where you have some fuel, some oxygen, which in the presence of heat will react with the oxygen, and then the byproduct of that reaction is light and heat. So that's why things combust. But before we had that theory, we had this theory called phlogiston. So according to the phlogiston theory, why do things combust? Well, it's because inside all matter, there's this thing called phlogiston. And the more phlogiston is inside this thing, the more combustible it is. After something's combusted, the phlogiston leaves that thing. And things that combust have phlogiston in it. Things that don't combust don't have phlogiston in it. Another one. So why are things alive? There's a theory called the Elan Vital. So why are things alive? It's because inside living things, there's this essence, this entity called Elan Vital. And so things that are alive have Elan Vital inside them. Things that aren't alive don't have Elan Vital inside them. When things die, that's Elan Vital leaving the body. Hopefully the listener's starting to get the similarities here. I'll do one more. Why do we get sick? There is a theory called miasma. Miasma stands for bad air. And so malaria, mal-air, comes from this idea of miasma. So why do we get sick? Well, now we know it's because of bacterial, so the germ theory of disease. But before the germ theory of disease, there's this idea that in the air is this thing called miasma. And so if there's a lot of miasma in the air, it's going to make you sick. And if there's not a lot of miasma, then you're not going to get sick. So all of these theories are all completely wrong. They all make the same mistake, which is positing some invisible entity inside the thing that you're trying to describe, some hidden essence that fully captures the very phenomenon that you're trying to explain. And I guess this class of theory, they're all called imponderable fluids. Imponderable fluids. Imponderable very much means difficult to think about, can't think about. And I just want to read a paragraph from the Wikipedia page about imponderable fluids. So we even find about half a dozen imponderable coexistent fluids regarded favorably by the scientific community. One was called heat, another fluid was called electricity, another phlogiston, another light, and so on. But perhaps the worst offender was Newton's fluid of gravity. So the way that Newton thought about gravity, and I guess actually it wasn't Newton, but it was Newton's best friend.
Yeah, I think Newton himself actually was aware of this issue. And actually, I think in the second edition or something of, was it Principia where he put forward the theory of gravity? I guess so, yeah. I think he added some remarks about this where he's like, I'm not necessarily taking like a phenomenological stance on what this thing is. I'm just, this seems to be required.
Yeah, so I guess it was in the second edition. The preface of the second edition was written by Newton's close confidant, the mathematician Roger Coates. And Roger Coates was the one who put forth this idea that within every particle of matter was endowed this thing called gravity. And gravity was this inherent force or power to attract other matter. And within each particle also had this property called inertia, which was this power to resist change in its states of motion. And so back to the Wikipedia page, no attempt was made to show how or why these forces acted, but because gravitation was taken as being just asserted as a force, all of a sudden spectators thought that they were at liberty to imagine any other number of forces as well. So that's where we get these imponderable fluids. So this is what Mach was pushing back against. Mach was pushing back against this tendency of people back then to try to explain the stuff that they see via stuff that they don't see, that they posit to exist to explain everything. And Mach was like, that's bullshit. You can't just make up stuff that you don't see in order to explain what you want to explain, like heat or combustion. But then he did that with atoms. He went far. And maybe that's where I'll pause. But you can see why there would be a pushback against this trend in the sciences at the time, to just keep making up things like forces, things like Elan Vital, things like caloric, things like phlogiston, just make them up and just say that's the thing that is causing the stuff that we see. And so the label for this mistake, the label for this class of theory is essentialism. So when I say the word essentialism, or when Popper talks about essentialism, it's about positing an essence, a thing on the inside that you cannot see that fully explains that which we want to explain, such that no further explanations are necessary. So once you posit caloric, there's no other questions that can be asked. That's why things are hot. And so that is what Mach was pushing back against. That's what Berkeley was pushing back against. And that's why Mach's criticisms of Newton are very important. And so the way that we'll kind of view these two poles is, on one hand, we have the Elan Vital folk. They're the essentialists. They're the ones who posit these deep hidden essences. But then what Mach wants to do is he wants to go so far in the other direction. He wants to say that nothing you can't see can be posited. It's all surface. It's all whatever is apparent. And that's where we get to instrumentalism. And so maybe the last thing I'll say, sorry to go on so long, is I just want to quote from the Boltzmann's Atom book, which is that like Mach's approach, the quote instrumentalist approach, was very focused on codifying phenomena that could be investigated directly. So the passage of sound waves through air, the mathematical relationship of gas and pressure when it's heated, the conversion of heat to power. And so according to Mach and according to instrumentalists, science is only about describing mathematically and precisely quantitative relationships between one observed phenomenon and another. And so if on one hand you have instrumentalism, which says that you can never posit anything you don't see, it's always just about relationship of one observation to another observation. And on the other hand, you have essentialism, which is all about just make up anything you want to describe anything you want. These are the two poles. And so what Popper puts forth and what Boltzmann put forth is, quote, this third way, which we'll maybe talk about. But just those examples of the various imponderable fluids kind of established, to me at least, what the problem situation was when Mach was writing, and why there was a necessary a needed pushback against this trend within sciences.
Yeah, good. So we're we're a bit off piste for the actual chapter. So we should say for the listeners, Mach's not actually a big part of the chapter. Like Popper's focusing on Berkeley the whole time, and then just makes some what I view as slightly derogatory remarks towards Mach at the end. But that was excellent and made me realize the extent of the similarities between Berkeley and Mach. So after reading this and then doing a bit of research, I knew that Mach had criticized Newton for his notions of absolute space and absolute time. And these are related but slightly orthogonal critiques to the essentialism critique. So there's like the force and gravity part of Newton's theories, which is where the essentialist critiques come in. And then he's also has to posit these global reference frames for his mechanics to make sense. And so he has to say there's some global coordinate system, basically, and he instantiates that as in what he calls absolute space and absolute time, which is an extremely intuitive concept and probably how most people think about the world, especially when you're doing any sort of geometry or anything like that. And I knew Mach had criticized Newton for the use of absolute space and absolute time. And he was also quite forward thinking with respect to that, because it turns out he was right in some sort of fundamental way that there is no like absolute space and absolute time. Everything is like sort of relative to masses in your local vicinity. And Berkeley's first two theses, or more like the second and third theses that Popper lifts in this chapter, are about criticism of the ideas of absolute space and absolute time. And so I was like, oh, Mach stole some of those ideas, maybe not actually stole, but relitigated some of those ideas. But now you're saying, well, he also, and so basically, like the first couple of Berkeley's theses are about absolute space, absolute time, and then he really gets into the criticism of essentialism and these occult qualities, he calls them, which extend from essences, but really go, like you were saying, to the extreme of wanting to throw away any sort of unobservable quantity from our science. And so you're saying Mach basically also adopted that view. And so it's pretty crazy, the similarities between them, I gotta say. Like, it seems like this chapter could be about one or the other, which does make me think a little less of Mach, maybe, but who knows? Maybe these ideas were just no one had, I guess, refuted Newtonian mechanics up to that point, so it was probably easy to keep having these kind of conversations, right?
Yeah, and it is hard to refute it in the absence of Einstein, right? So for the listener, gravity now is not seen as this intrinsic thing inside particles. The modern Einsteinian view of gravity is it's due to the curvature of space-time. And so you see that Einstein's gotten rid of absolute space and absolute time because both space and time can bend and warp depending on the presence of mass. And now it's an interaction. It's the byproduct of interactions between certain things rather than an intrinsic essence of the thing. So too with heat and with life, presumably. There's not Elan Vital, but life is the product of these very complex interactions of stuff that we don't fully understand. Heat is an easier one because we see heat as just the byproduct of the kinetic energy of particles moving around. So yeah, it's unclear how much Mach was just plagiarizing, to go to the ChatGPT stuff that we started with, and how much of it is just his intuitions aligned with Berkeley's, that there's something weird and something suspect about just being able to say that I've explained this by making up an entity that explains the thing that you want to explain.
So like you said, I think it's very intuitive to say, okay, I don't like these sort of random occult qualities that people are appealing to explain all this stuff. Let's just get rid of everything we can observe. But as you pointed out, that's too far, because sometimes things we can't observe do play a role in our scientific theories. Atoms are a good example. And so I don't know how you think about this now. Like, the way modern science, I think, has basically settled this debate is to say, okay, we're not going to posit essences, like hidden natures of objects. within those objects that make those objects do things, make them act in a certain way or move in certain ways, be attracted to certain other bodies, etc. But what we are okay with are unobservable other entities that we're gonna posit, right? So it's not about the nature of the entity; it's an actual like unknown extra entity. So atoms or dark matter, dark energy. These are things like, based on our best understanding, there's some sort of interaction. So we have an understanding of a system, and according to our best theories, something's acting in a way that shouldn't be. It shouldn't be if the only things in that system are what we know about. And so we say, okay, there must be a third thing or an extra thing in this system that's causing this. That's causing the dynamics that we're witnessing, and we're going to call that thing X, and then we can try and go investigate X's qualities. And so we do allow that. So we've done that with planets and stuff, right? When we realized that Kepler was wrong about his ellipses, we said, okay, well maybe there's actually like another planet out there. And indeed, that was true. That planet was, I don't know, Neptune or something.
And importantly, when you posit other entities that have behaviors that you also posit, that's falsifiable. So you can be wrong about that. You could posit there's a planet that you don't see, and if that planet's going to be there, then this kind of orbit would be observed. And then if you don't observe that orbit, then you were wrong about what you posited. But that can't happen with concepts like the caloric, because the caloric is posited to explain definitionally everything that you observe about the thing that you're trying to explain. And so no matter what you see, you can always explain it via the caloric, but that's not the case with particles. So there's a quote from Linley's book, Mach's antipathy to theorizing and to the invocation of unprovable notions led him to some extreme opinions. In his book, The Conservation of Energy, he remarks, "We say now that water consists of hydrogen and oxygen, but this hydrogen and oxygen are merely thoughts or names which, at the sight of water, we keep ready to describe the phenomena which are not present, but which will appear again whenever we want." So the mistake Mach's making here is that the positing of the atoms of hydrogen and oxygen, this is testable. You can do electrolysis. You can see if it decomposes into twice as much hydrogen as oxygen. And if it doesn't, then you're wrong. You're wrong. But you can't do that with essences. And so that's a major distinction. And the whole book, Boltzmann's Atom, goes into this battle between Boltzmann and Mach for, I guess they were battling their entire life, because Boltzmann was pushing forth the atomic theory, and Mach's like, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Shut up with your stupid atoms. And you can just see how the instrumentalist position just goes way too far, because now the only thing that you can ever study is stuff that you observe. But what Popper points out in chapter 3 is that our understanding of the physical world has been so enriched by the positing of unobservable entities, things like air and X-rays and black holes and electromagnetic radiation. We would not have these concepts if we only were able to study, pressure or the movement of waves in an ocean, only stuff that you can directly observe. And so that's why both the essentialist and the instrumentalist positions are wrong.
Could you maybe flesh out for me why you're calling Mach an instrumentalist? So I wouldn't have definitely called him that. I would have just called him, he seems like he was sort of a early positivist, and an empiricist in the sense that he just wanted to explain phenomenon by other phenomenon that we could observe. But it's not as if he thought we could discover truths about those observable phenomenon, right? He thought there was there was things to say, whereas I view the instrumentalist as saying none of our science is corresponding to reality. It's all just a useful fiction. It's all just a calculating device.
So what's Mach known for now?
Mach speed, baby.
Mach speed, exactly. Like the that's where you're traveling faster than the speed of sound or whatever. And so he primarily just studied relationships between, say, gases and pressures or speeds. And so for him, science was all about just using the instrument of mathematics to describe relationships between observables. There's no truth beyond what you can observe. There's truth with regards to, does this instrument effectively predict what we're going to see? But it's instrumentalism in the sense that his primary goal is applying the instrument of mathematics to being able to make predictions about this phenomenon given this other phenomenon. So yes, there's truths, but the truths are in the discovery of mathematical relationships between stuff. That's like there's truths with regards to how effective your instrument is, but asking like why questions, like why is there heat, is just not something he's interested in. He's just interested in being able to describe the effect of heat on, say, boiling water, and then the pressure that would exhibit on the in the container in which the water is boiled. So it's just about describing relationships, and then those relationships can be more or less effective. But it's not about uncovering explanations of the phenomenon. He doesn't care about what water's made of. He just wants to be able to describe how it acts.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'll take your word for it. Like, as for instance, I wouldn't call Berkeley an instrumentalist. Berkeley thought there were like things to discover. So he thought there were regularities in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Again, bit of a mystery as to how this happens, given that nature is being generated by our minds. But I think there's another appeal to God there.
Mm-hmm.
And so he thought our job as scientists was just to discover these regularities in nature. And this is what he called a law of nature. And he did call these explanations. And he thought, like, I wouldn't call him an instrumentalist because he thought there were regularities to discover, and he thought we could discover them, right? So he didn't just view us as like coming up with scientific models to calculate things. And in fact, later on, some of his later theses, he talks about that mathematical explanation is different from this kind of scientific explanation. And so he actually has these three kinds of explanation that he demarcates. He has mathematical explanation, this essentialist explanation, which he just rejects and says it's impossible and foolish. And then this third kind of explanation where you're discovering these kind of regularities and discovering like how things move, how they exist in relation to each other, laws of motion, etc. And so, but he thought you could discover these, right? And that like when we were interacting with the world, we and you know, like our science could actually shed light on what these phenomenon really were. And so, yeah, I guess I'll just take your word. I guess one, do you agree with that? But two, I guess if so, I'll just take your word that Mach departed from Berkeley on that. Yeah,
let me quote. Yeah, so let me quote David Lindley again. So Lindley is not a Popperian from what I can tell. Hasn't read Deutsch, doesn't fetishize the word explanation like I do. But this is what Lindley says of Mach's worldview. So in Mach's world, there was to be no such thing as explaining in the way that scientists have always understood it. Mach even went so far as to argue that the traditional notion of cause and effect, that kicking a rock makes it move, that heating a gas makes it expand, was presumptuous and therefore to be denied scientific status. So he's just not interested in explanation. He's just interested in relationships. And so to the extent that someone is not interested in explaining why there is the relationship, to that extent, I would call them an instrumentalist, just like the Copenhagenites are. And so in our episode 33, we talk about how modern physicists are just interested in coming up with better mathematics to be able to make better predictions. But they are taught not to ask the question, why does a wave function collapse? They just ask the question, how do we describe it more effectively? And so that lack of interest in explanation is, I think, the one of the defining factors of instrumentalism and instrumentalists.
Maybe the last thing to hit is just Berkeley's notion of mathematical explanation, and his discussion of what we would now just call mathematical models, which I think, with one semi-major caveat, he got roughly right, or at least like is roughly in alignment with how I view math now. And so he thinks that mathematical models are sort of, they're like, he calls them just tricks or knacks or things that help us predict things. And he says trying to call them true is a category error. So it's like they're not within the realm of thing that we call true or false. They're just useful. So that's where I guess Mach wanted to just look at all of science as like trying to find mathematical models, and that's where the instrumentalism comes in, because you remove the word true from your vocabulary, really, under the instrumentalist framework. You're just talking about utility. Like, are we good at calculating things we want to calculate? And Berkeley didn't go that far, but that is what he viewed the role of mathematics to be. Which I thought was, maybe I should learn more about the history of math here. My sense is that was like kind of prescient for that time, especially because I'm guessing most people would have thought that there's some sort of like fundamental relationship between math and the world, meaning that like there's some sort of mysterious linkage between them because Newton's mathematics described the world so well, right? There's like got to be some sort of one-to-one correspondence between mathematical worlds and reality. And I think Berkeley just wanted to say, no, like, you know, we have math. They do, different systems do better and worse jobs of predicting things. And he makes this point that, like, you know, if I'm right, then there might be multiple mathematical models which are different and yet explain the same phenomenon more like equally well, say. And I thought that was a nice point, actually. And then I guess he makes reference to this guy named Torricelli, who I didn't have time to look up in great detail, but who I think had a model for something like an ideal gas sort of thing that I guess Newton also worked on. And they actually had different math for it, but they made the same predictions under certain scenarios. And he said, like, that kind of shows you that, like, it's not like one of them's true, one of them's false. Like, for answering that question, they're both just equally useful. And then, so it all depends on context. Now, the one maybe caveat to bring to bear on this is that somehow it doesn't quite seem sufficient to claim the mathematical models are like only ever instrumental, because they have helped predict the existence of phenomenon that we've later discovered, right? So like famously gravitational waves, I think black holes and pulsars were all predicted by Einstein's math and then only found later. Similar with like missing elements in the periodic table, right? So we sort of discovered the regularities there and had a model for the elements. And then once we filled in that model, we realized, like, wait a second, there we should be able to go out and find this thing called beryllium or whatever. And only then did we discover it. The same with like electromagnetic waves. And then more recently, like Higgs boson, gluon, quarks, right? These were predicted by the standard model. And then only then we went and found them. And so they do have this ability to like shed light on things that are missing from the picture. And so that complicates the picture a bit somehow, because it's like, it's just like, I still wouldn't want to say a mathematical model is true. I'd still only want to say it's useful, but some of them are so useful that they point to gaps in your existing explanation that then you can go and fill. And so it's like you still want to take them quite seriously. Like if there's a discrepancy between a model that has been good in all these other scenarios and then it has a discrepancy with something else you observe, you don't want to necessarily say, well, this is just the edge of the mathematical model's abilities and we should discard what it's saying. You might actually want to take what it's saying pretty seriously to the point where you start questioning like your own theory or if there's something else to discover there.
It's viewing, it's like the difference between like a model and reality, right? And they often are so overlapping and imbricated that it's hard to switch our view. But like, so you have the mathematics of like the quantum mechanical wave function, and then there's the I'll just use the many worlds interpretation view of it, which is that the wave function is actually describing the multiverse, and so the multiverse is a different thing than the wave function or the mathematics of the wave function. Just like if the mathematics predict a black hole, the mathematical symbolic representation of that black hole is different than the actual black hole, right? And the instruments can lead to discoveries about what actually is, but they are different, right? We don't say that the math is existing. We say that the math points to something that exists, and then we go independently test it and try to find it. And so, yeah, there's this is it Tegmark that's putting forth our mathematical universe idea, which I haven't read, but I reject it a priori, but obviously I should read it before I say something too strong. But Popper's main point is that, math is an instrument. Language is instrument. So there's no problem with being instrumentalist with regards to mathematics. Mathematics allows you to use rules of inference to get like secondary information from your assumptions, that if the assumptions are true, the secondary information is also going to be true. But then what we do with that information is context dependent. That information may lead to the positing of some entity, or just may lead to some behavioral change in yourself. But there is just a difference between the mathematics and reality, and it's just sometimes hard to distinguish between those two things. Maybe another thing I just want to flag from this essay. So we aren't going through it like chapter by chapter, page by page, but the structure of the essay is, first Popper highlights 19 or 21 theses, 21 theses from Berkeley that have modern relevance. Then he has some discussion afterwards. But one of the theses, I just want to read in full. A general practical result, which I propose to call Berkeley's razor, of this analysis of physics allows us to a priori eliminate from physical sciences all essentialist explanations. If they have a mathematical and predictive content, they may be admitted qua mathematical hypotheses, while their essentialist interpretation is eliminated. If not, they may be ruled out altogether. This razor is sharper than Occam's because all entities are ruled out except that those which are perceived or perceivable. What does he mean when he says they may be admitted qua mathematical hypothesis? I think one good example there is the notion of a point mass. So a point mass is a mathematical construct. It's a mathematical hypothesis that allows you to simplify a bunch of stuff. And so in the language of math, you can posit that a point mass exists. But that's different than thinking that within each body, the entire mass of it is located in this essentialist thing that we're going to call a point mass, call Elan Vital, right? And so you can introduce these fundamental units in your hypotheses, as long as you recognize that they're mathematical constructs that allow us to calculate better. But that's different than saying inside every living thing is Elan Vital. And that's the point that I believe he's trying to make with this Berkeley razor.
Although Berkeley wanted to eliminate all unobservables, I think. So this is going farther than Popper wanted to, but it's still nice. Yeah, I mean, this was Berkeley's thing. Like, this is why Popper's saying Mach was quite close to Berkeley, because Berkeley was making this point. And like Berkeley, atoms, the modern notion of atoms, I guess hadn't been invented yet by the time Berkeley was writing. But Popper hints that like Berkeley also would have rejected that, basically, because like he was also think like what we could see was all there was to see, and like we should get rid of essences, we should get rid of all this stuff that we couldn't observe. And so I didn't quite understand this Berkeley's razor by Popper, because like it's like it goes a step too far if you actually interpreted it how I think Berkeley would want to interpret it. But I think Popper is sort of just giving a nod to like, okay, this is a nice way to attack the essentialists, even if, yes, Berkeley maybe took this. Like,
I see. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I got stuck there. Nice. So I kind of just want to summarize at this stage. I don't know if you have any more things you want to hit, but
I would say just the last thing, I don't think we should go into it, but my research took me down like I was saying earlier, the debate between Mach and Newton, but not about essentialism, but about these absolute frames of reference and stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's some funny thought experiments that Newton used to defend his notion of absolute space and absolute time, involving like rotating bucket of water is the most famous one, but also then like two weights with a coil attached between them, and like would an observer be able to tell if the weights were moving, etc. So I just encourage people to like, there's some good YouTube videos and stuff on the history of that debate and like who really won it and how it relates to modern physics and stuff. So it's just a plug to go learn some more about that stuff, which is
yeah, nice. So this chapter just gave me a better understanding of how these major figures kind of played into the development of modern scientific thought. So the battle between Mach and Boltzmann is very much on this essentialism versus instrumentalism line. And it's just cool to see how these ideas kind of mutate and shift generation to generation, going from stuff that's quite absurd, like idealism, all the way through to a much more nuanced perspective as to when certain entities can be posited, where is the proper domain of predictive instrumentation, what kinds of moves are just going to lead to dead ends, and what kind of moves are basically ceasing all explanations, such as the positing of essential entities. And so just in terms of like the lineage of thinkers and the philosophy of science, I got a huge amount of it, a huge amount out of this chapter from that perspective. And I feel like I have a bit more of an understanding of how Berkeley fits into the whole picture now, which I didn't really have before.
To slightly subvert your message, I would just give a warning to readers that I really only got anything out of this chapter after I learned about the history of this particular line of thought and these thinkers sort of independently. I kind of tried to read it once, got pretty confused. I found Popper has this weird style when he's giving these theses where it's his language for roughly half the time, and then Berkeley's language for the other half of the time. And with so many footnotes and references that like it does not make for the easiest reading. And so I was pretty lost, to be honest, the first time I read it. And then I like took a step back, read about Berkeley, read about Mach, read about Newton, trying to figure out like what he was talking about. And then once I had absorbed that, then it was much easier to read the chapter and glimpse it. So I would encourage readers to maybe take the same track if they're unfamiliar with the history like I was.
I totally echo that. Yeah, I definitely struggled the first time as well. Sweet, man. That was fun. Yeah, good to get back to a CNR series, back to our roots. All these guests and reaction episodes have been dragging us down from the core meat of the matter. But yeah, to be continued. Good times.